It's Halloween again! Hopefully, which means it's time to celebrate all of the things that go bump in the night, scream on your TV, or just show you the gore and violence you know you crave. No matter what kind of person you are, there always seems to be something around for you to sink your gnarled, bloodthirsty teeth into when it comes to horror, you sicko. We're not talking about that subtle, psychological, atmospheric kind of horror. No, we're here for schlock. No, not that schlock. That's a good movie, though. I'm talking about horror's unique position of being the perfect breeding ground for low-rent, often lowbrow nonsense that tickles the lizard part of everyone's brains and delivers a ridiculous experience enhanced by total earnesty. For horror films, novels, or TV shows, this can range from ultra-violence for the sake of ultra-violence, cheesy dialogue, casting Nick Cage.
Have you ever been dragged to the sidewalk and being until you pissed blood?
Or just going for sheer absurdity. Sadly, there aren't any schlocky horror games that give a similar effect. Or so I thought. Last year, I talked about Koudelka, a fascinating and experimental horror RPG for the PS1 developed by the company Sacnoth. You can click right on the spot up top if you'd like to know more, but long story short, it's a very interesting and aesthetically wonderful experience with some innovative ideas for the time. I think it's worth checking out if that oddball combination sounds up your alley, but I have my issues that keep me from saying it's some amazing hidden gem. Profoundly intriguing, but more than anything, it really left me interested in playing its follow-up series, Shadow Hearts. I went into this review completely blind, not because I wanted to go in that way, it's just, it never really came up for me. I've said before, horror, not really my forte. I was gonna play it anyway, I'm sure it wouldn't be that different from Koudelka. And let me tell you, I was not ready for this game. I was not ready. Shadow Hearts is an absolutely ridiculous trip, chock full of Lovecraftian monster designs, drenched in trashy B-movie charm, and steeped in that weirdly charming, edgy, emo nature endemic of early 2000s anime. We're talking Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 as directed by Takashi Miike. It's Japanese Grindhouse before people tried imitating Grindhouse. I went into this thinking it'd be a more conventionally structured JRPG than Koudelka while retaining the horror theme, and it ended up being one of the wackiest, most baffling, and oddly endearing JRPGs I've played in a while. So, this Halloween, or whenever I manage to get this video out, let's pop some corn and indulge in the sillier side of horror. This is Shadow Hearts. We open to a newspaper informing us on the murder of a priest on the streets of France, his daughter believed to be missing. Cut to a train populated with very uncanny looking models. We find a girl being guarded by what seems to be members of a country's military. Before too long, a strange old man in a top hat appears and starts killing the guards, using a bizarre power to deflect bullets and blast what seems to be our hero back several train cars. Taking control of this rough-looking, in multiple ways, young man, we confront the strange man on the roof of the car. The young man we're in control of turns into a demon, loses the battle, but takes advantage of a sudden flash of light to punch the man's eye out and escapes with the girl in tow. Okay, I'll hand it to you, Shadow Hearts. That certainly made me more curious as to what the sweet hey-how's going on than slowly riding a horse to a cliff top. This opening might seem like a lot to take in at once, because it is, but really, I can't blame it for failing to set the mood. You get introduced to the villain, the hero, the heroine, and the combat system in under 10 minutes from pressing start. That's absolutely breakneck pacing. No setup besides the few lines from the newspaper, just tossing you in the deep end and telling you to get swimming. Alright, Sacnoth, I can respect that. I do the same thing when I volunteer as a lifeguard. Here's the thing about Shadow Hearts. Despite being a successor to Koudelka, even featuring key items and characters from that game as major plot elements, it's basically the polar opposite in terms of structure and tone. Koudelka was a small, compact, atmospheric haunted house concerned with 3 people dealing with the fallout of one person's really terrible decision. It was small scale, dealing heavily with the personal hang-ups of its characters and how they resolved them over the course of a rather simple plot. Shadow Hearts, meanwhile, is a plot about jumping from horror set piece to set piece, encountering bombastic personalities on a globetrotting journey to save the world. It's much larger in scope, oddly light in tone, and while it is still concerned with individual character arcs, they don't feel as relatable or impactful as Koudelka. This is a plot more about having fun with absurdities as opposed to trying to build atmosphere or mystery, like a cheesy horror movie. Or at least it feels like a bunch of those slammed back to back. I mean, after Pineapple Head here hops off the train train and has a meet cute with the girl he saved, the first thing they do is find a cannibal village where the residents are completely unsubtle about the fact they eat people. Oh, his name is Yuri, and her name is Alice. Probably should have mentioned that before, but it's easy to forget trifling details like the main characters' names when you're dealing with wacky stuff at the rate this game does it. I'm not kidding, I actually forgot a good chunk of what happened by the end because this game just has left turn after left turn. It made so many turns, it's practically a circle. Which isn't to say it isn't good, it's actually a really fun plot with only a hint of, let's call them JRPG-isms. Things like Alice not having a lot going on outside of being a MacGuffin and love interest for Yuri, Yuri himself flip-flopping between acting like he's some ice-cool punk and a sappy, broken kid, the behavior and appearance of characters not making much sense when this game is supposed to take place in 1913, religious iconography tossed in just because it looks cool, and several of these factors are pushed even further when you realize how this game is, well, kind of emo. Hey, no hate towards emos. I listen to MCR, but you can't deny a story of a brooding loner who turns into demons trying to work out his deep-seated personal trauma while also trying to save the world from an almost cartoonishly evil bad guy doesn't have at least a few AFI songs kicking around on its playlist. There's actually quite a bit of overlap between emo subculture and anime, and Shadow Hearts almost feels like the culmination of both. Like if there was a Venn diagram, it would be the intersection. I won't lie, I actually kinda dig it. Despite the overall goofy tone of the characters and dialogue, it has moments where they go all in on the kind of overly melodramatic indulgences that make me want to start blaring Welcome to the Black Parade. And while I can see people scoffing at certain scenes in the game, I actually found it to be endearing. Maybe it's because I was too young to really experience that era of emotionally charged self-reflection that marked the high point of emo subculture, so I can only look back on it as an interested observer. But this game really feels like a relic of the early 2000s, a real time capsule of a story and cast we just don't really see anymore, for better and for worse. The plot of Shadow Hearts isn't altogether deep or hugely compelling, but dang it, it is so much stupid fun. Every moment of this game's story makes it feel like the creators were having a great time making it, whether it's the silly moments full of cheese, the melodramatic character scenes, or the few genuinely spooky parts that remind you, this is supposed to be a horror game. I believe the feelings of a creator or team of creators have while working on a project can be felt in the end result, and there's a lot to be said about a work conveying the joy the developers of Shadow Hearts must have felt while working on it. I imagine this shift in overall feel is in part thanks to the game's director, Matsuzo Machida, and his direct citing of inspirations like Go Nagai's Devilman and the works of screenwriter Keisuke Fujikawa. This world is meant to be based on history, but it's such a loose interpretation full of fantastical events. The time period almost feels nebulous. The characters don't really talk or look like people from 1913 would, but they're written with a sort of scrappy quality that makes them endearing. It all feels like a strange dream or glimpse into this little pocket of alternate history that can only be seen through this game. There really isn't anything else like Shadow Hearts. I mean, except maybe the sequels, but I haven't played those yet. I can almost picture the developers sitting around the office excitedly writing down whatever oddball ideas they could fit onto the disc. It was a new generation, hardware was getting more powerful, discs could hold more information, they could really make large-scale adventures like their contemporaries, and by golly, they were going to stand out doing so. Just think about all the big games being made today. Could you possibly imagine something like this getting any funding? A relatively small company making an ambitious, wacky, comedic horror RPG? No way would this be made in another generation, and it's worth experiencing it for that alone. Even in a library as vast and revered as the PS2's, this is the only way you'll get to experience what this game has to offer. Which is why I don't really want to discuss too much of the story in detail. This really is a game you should play for yourself if you want to feel all the love the developers at Sacnoth put in making it. However, despite that oddball energy and madcap wackiness, the actual gameplay of Shadow Hearts is very standard JRPG fare. You're traveling around small pocket areas and solving local problems in pursuit of a larger world-spanning threat. It's a road trip. You stop by one place and get the heck out of Dodge, only to move to another place with another problem to solve. Just got out of a cannibal village with the help of a Chinese wizard? Now you're in a strangely European-looking city in Asia, somehow, and a femme fatale is bombing the city streets, forcing Yuri and Alice to flee from the approaching military officers. But all this does structurally is get you to a quick string of boss fights and a new party member. This again is in contrast to Koudelka, which was more about about unfolding one location in pursuit of an evolving mystery. It was closer to, say, Resident Evil than your traditional JRPG. While that was just one aspect that made that game unique, and it did contribute to the horror theme, the areas could feel a bit stale since the scenery didn't change too much from room to room. But Shadow Hearts? Man, I just went from an airfield to a cursed fishing village. This game is itching to show you different places. It's certainly more conventional for the genre than its predecessor, and either method has its appeal since the two games are quite different in terms of tone. You know, if Koudelka is Resident Evil or Silent Hill, Shadow Hearts is like Resident Evil 4 or like Evil Within. The close-knit, silent, claustrophobic environments of Koudelka wouldn't fit the bombastic globetrotting of Shadow Hearts and vice versa. And while I'm all for developers experimenting with new ideas, I will admit Shadow Hearts feels like a much more approachable layout for the horror aesthetic Sacnoth had in their previous game. I said in my review of Koudelka, man, I'm really tired of saying that name, but the comparison feels needed. How the horror elements didn't really make the game scary because they felt more like an aesthetic than anything else. The mechanics of the game, while very unique, didn't lend themselves to creating a dreadful atmosphere in the same way as the presentation. They were still very RPG-like in execution and failed to inspire fear or dread in conjunction with the visuals and art design. Playing the game today is so tame, the scariest thing about it is the price a copy goes for online. Meanwhile, Shadow Hearts still isn't very scary, but it also doesn't try to be. It's leaning much heavier on camp and pulpy adventure, and while that does make the horrific design of the monsters feel even more surface level, it doesn't make it any less visually interesting. I mean, just look at some of these monster designs. You have brain-eating giant frogs with masks for eyes, naked vengeful spirits carrying an exposed brain while doing handstands, and elongated statue-like husks with questionable protrusions that, according to the bestiary, represent scorn. So these things have literal hate boners. Then of course you have nightmare fuel bosses like this 3-headed angel abomination and skinned Jesus with rainbow wings. I don't care what you have to say about incongruous tone or out of place aesthetics, you are not finding that kind of thing anywhere else. These designs being slotted into a more standardized JRPG structure does feel a bit odd, but I say the horror themes stand out even more than before because they're going all in on it. Some parts are still genuinely creepy, like the backstory of the haunted fishing village or the secret dollhouse mini dungeon toward the end of the game. These moments stand out not for being the spooky thing in an otherwise regular game, they stand out for being when the game wants to take its horror subject matter seriously, even if, again, it's closer to a conventional JRPG at its core, with the horror elements being more for flair. Even the combat is more like the genre standard than its predecessor, but with a few unique twists to make it stand out. The series actually has a few major standout mechanics with the battle system, with the main element being inspired from just the weirdest place possible. Your menu actions aren't anything out of the ordinary, but when you make your decision for the turn, ta-da! Behold, the Judgement Ring, Shadow Heart's biggest claim to fame. I'm sure you're probably familiar with some RPGs giving you an extra task to make the fight a tad more interactive, the Mario and Luigi games for instance. Well, while those games have you pressing timed button prompts, the Judgement Ring has you timing your button presses like an old Cyclone arcade game. You know, the ones with the spinning row of lights you stop at button presses to win prizes? In this game, even your basic attacks require you to hit the colored sections on the wheel to carry them out, with an extra part at the end of each section for big damage. And this happens with every single action, including just trying to use items. Does it get tedious? You bet your sweet buns it does, but keep a pin in that for now because it's a really fun addition. It doesn't just ask you to mash a button or hit one at the right time, you have to nail more and more spots on the wheel as you get more powerful skills, and the different weapons have different spaces on the wheel. It requires you to pay attention to know the exact time to hit the lever, but most spaces are generous enough for this to not be too hard. Plus, with the added challenge of wanting to nail those critical hit areas, it introduces a bit of a risk and reward to every choice in combat. Want to try hitting for more damage? Better get really good at gambling because you're hitting up the casino each time you do anything here. And if this sounds like it doesn't make sense within the context of a horror-themed game, it actually does. See, the Judgement Ring system was inspired by the pachinko machines made by Aruze, which was kind of their parent company at the time. Why is that scary? Well, aside from all the terrors pachinko machines have brought to the gaming industry, Aruze was the company that acquired and then absorbed Sacnoth, basically making the company defunct by 2009, which means Sacnoth wasn't just killed, they were murdered! But hey, we got the Judgement Ring out of it, so Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, it was also inspired by beat-em-ups, but that's not as funny. The other big thing the game has for combat is exclusive to Yuri himself, a power only he possesses, which is not only incorporated into the plot, but directly tied to his backstory and growth as a character. And no, I don't think he plays Predaplants. Yuri has the power to obtain the spirits of and transform into different demons. He's called a Harmonixer in this game, but I think that's a translation issue. It might be changed to Harmonizer in later entries. You start off with a single spirit of darkness, which means yes, Yuri is the Dark Souls of JRPG protagonists. As you battle different elements of enemies, he'll increase experience with 6 different categories: fire, water, wind, earth, light, and of course dark. Once you gather enough, you travel to the depressing graveyard inside his head to fight a new spirit and gain its power, with each one having 3 power levels. According to Machida, he wanted to implement some of the monster designs besides just being enemies, and he thought this would help the game stand out even more. I wanted to say it reminded me of how you transform into demons in Digital Devil Saga, but those games didn't come out until 2004, and that wasn't optional. Everyone just had a demon form in combat. I should really review those games sometime. Those games are awesome. Personally, while the concept is extremely cool, I find it a bit disappointing the more I think about it. Yuri is just a beater if he isn't transformed, and each transformation is static with 1 recovery skill, 1 stat boosting skill, and 1 attack skill. They don't grow or have the chance to be modified over the course of the game. You just unlock the next tier after dozens of fights against enemies of their attribute, which is honestly understandable when you consider there are 18 fusions with 2 secret ones in the game, but it does make each one a bit dull to use after a while, since you can't really shake it up without just using different fusions, although even that's limited by the fact you can only have 3 equipped at a time, which, okay, that I don't really get. Why is Yuri only allowed to choose between 3 in battle at any given time? I know he's kind of a meathead, but this is literally the power he's been using his whole life, and he can't keep track of all 6 elements. What if I need the water spirit in a pinch, but never have it equipped because I think it's useless most of the time? Because it's useless most of the time. Huh, Yuri? You don't remember how to turn into a fish man? I'm not going to pretend I know what the conditions were like in production or how things work under the hood in this game, but I don't imagine it would have been a big deal to just replace the previous level spirit with the new one when we unlock it and keep all 6 open for fusion and combat. Maybe that would have made me branch out more often instead of just sticking largely with dark, fire, and light for most of my playthrough. Also, just saying this now, light fusions look super cool, and they're my favorite on visuals alone. I also love how he spends the first half of the game looking like he's in pain when he transforms, but after a major character event, I don't want to spoil here, he does it in confidence. It's like he's accepted his power for what it is and takes full control of it. It's a really great detail. What isn't a great detail is the system implemented for its inclusion. Sanity. That's right, grab your Ouija boards and ring up everybody's favorite racist. This is a Lovecraft game. You know, in case this didn't make it obvious enough. But hey, this game came out in 2001, so I think it actually predates everyone wagging their eyebrows at Cthulhu. Now, sanity points are essentially the 3rd resource to track in combat. You got HP, MP, and SP, and Yuri needs to spend SP to fuse, which I guess is like him activating ultra polymerization, and I think it's pretty cool contextually. You know, he's literally spending his own human consciousness to attain the power of demonic entities. It's neat. It also explains why he has more sanity than anyone else, despite being one of the more unstable characters in the cast. Everyone else has pitiful amounts of SP, and that sucks because it's also a timer. See, a character's sanity starts at full each battle, but decreases by 1 every turn. If they run out, they enter a berserk state where you can't control them until making them regain SP, which means Yuri is the only one able to actually interact with the mechanic in any way, and it's just a detriment for everyone else. Granted, the limits only really come up in boss fights, but that just means you have to waste turns restoring a character's sanity at a point where they probably need to be doing anything else. You can ponder your insignificance in the universe at a later time. We need to kill whatever this is supposed to be. Then there are bosses who specifically reduce sanity, which were a massive hassle, especially since Alice, the supposedly strong-willed girl with years of experience dealing with freaky supernatural phenomenon, has the least SP of everyone. And you need to have her in your party since she's the best healer in the game. By the end of my playthrough, she was level 54 with 14 sanity points. We've been on this journey for nearly a full endgame year, Alice. Just accept the chaotic horrors of the uncaring cosmos are a thing we have to deal with already. I'm tired of chucking you items. It just seems like an unneeded system that sounded good on paper to help convey horror, but I don't think the characters besides Yuri really need it. Or at least the other characters shouldn't have so little SP. I haven't talked about the other characters, have I? Oops. Well, in all honesty, I don't have much to say about them. Besides Yuri, whose personal growth and development is directly tied to the main plot, and Alice being the primary MacGuffin and love interest with at least a little going on, I don't think the rest of the party has a whole lot to them. Even the villain, Roger Bacon, has more nuance to his character than half of your party members. Zhu Zin is a character that feels like he's here to be a mentor, and at least they didn't go the easy route of making him a pervert. Instead, he's just slightly wacky and actually functions as a teacher to the inexperienced main characters. He's fine, and I remember him having one cool moment about his old friend, but it almost feels like this story is just another day in his life, and he'll carry on the same when it's done. Margaret is almost a total joke, being this ridiculous femme fatale bordering on parody of the trope. She is at least the funniest one in combat. Her third attack always has her flash her underwear, her analyze skill has her pull out a gigantic pair of colorful sunglasses, and she grants attacks water element with an 80s pull cord. Again! They must have been having a lot of fun making this. Then there's Keith, a vampire whose whole arc is being bored in his castle, finding excitement on the adventure, and then getting bored and going back home. Yeah, you have an exorcist, a super spy, and a vampire on your team, and none of them have a whole lot going on in terms of being actual characters. But hey, maybe that's not the point. They're all grown adults who've seen what they need to see before the story began, and it's up to the kids to carry all the character development, which includes your final party member, Hallie. Hallie is Koudelka's son. Yeah, she's in this game. She plays an important role in the latter half of the game, so that was really cool to see. She and her son have a rocky relationship because of how he inherited her psychic powers, and her getting apprehended by the bad guys for the villain's plan certainly didn't help. His arc is all about rescuing his mother and repairing their relationship, which was really sweet to see. Which kind of explains why my final party for most of the second half of the game ended up being Yuri, Alice, and Hallie. I just found them to be the most compelling, the most endearing, and the best rounded abilities for combat even at the end. However, while reflecting on the whole experience, I realized something about how this game feels that I just can't stop thinking about. While I was doing research, I found a quote by Aruze's CEO at the time, Kazuo Okada, saying the goal of Shadow Hearts was more to create a good work rather than making a high profit, which sounds odd coming from a pachinko company, but I can respect the sentiment. He goes on to say how he felt the JRPG genre was in decline and Shadow Hearts was meant to revitalize it. Why he said that, I have no idea. The interview where he said that didn't give much context. Remember, the year 2000 had games like Final Fantasy IX, Grandia 2, Vagrant Story, Dragon Quest VII, Breath of Fire 4, Paper Mario, Legend of Dragoon, and that weird Game Boy Color spin-off of Quest 64 we all totally remember. Not to mention all the other games that were available on the same system by the time Shadow Hearts hit shelves. Sure, stuff like Evergrace and Ephemeral Fantasia are but by June 2001 in Japan, December 2001 for the States, you could already be playing games like Eternal Ring, Okage Shadow King, Sugunai Atonement, Dark Cloud, not to mention titles released shortly afterwards like Lapusel Tactics, Xenosaga 1, Jade Cocoon 2, Suikoden 3, and Wild Arms 3. Oh, and there's the matter of a little game called Final Fantasy X releasing within a week of Shadow Hearts. The genre was doing fine, great even, still riding off its heyday in the 90s. JRPGs were using new tech to be more ambitious, more adventurous, more. And maybe that's what Okada meant. Shadow Hearts feels like the last bastion of a team trying to give one final swan song to the style of the last generation, a style that would rarely be seen going forward for the era. Pre-rendered backgrounds, standard turn-based combat, short dungeons, a plot that would feel lesser if it was released just a year or two later, and there is something cozy about that. Yes, this is cozy. It's just old school enough when it was released to not quite be the future of the genre, but the foundation is familiar and rock solid for whatever crazy ideas they wanted to add. And they clearly had some crazy ideas. You know, the FMV looks creepy, the models are a bit chunky, the characters are kind of flat. ironically, and the combat's a bit sluggish because of the Judgement Ring, but it's also highly approachable for newcomers or longtime genre fans if you're willing to give it the time. However, the one aspect I can't say I enjoy from that era of design is obtusely hidden sequences that feel mandatory, which includes how to get the good ending. Let's spend some time going over what you need to do the game never tells you about. Oh, and the ending as well. So if you'd rather not hear that, jump to the time on screen now. After confronting Roger Bacon in his secret summoning circle under the Nemeton Monastery, hey, that's the place from the last game, that's cute. The party beats his demonic teeth in, only for him to reveal this was all according to Keikaku, because the power generated from the fight was all he needed to fulfill his real plan. Did you know this was going to be King of Fighters? Because I sure didn't. By the way, this mysterious man calling himself Roger Bacon is the man from the very start of the game. He was helping out another wizard, but after his downfall, he took matters into his own hands to see his plot come to fruition. So what is his plan? Okay, bear with me here. His plan is to use the powers collected from your fight, Alice's connection with the light, and Koudelka's powers of darkness to revive an ancient H.R. Giger-looking construct from the ocean's floor called a float. The purpose of which is to lure a nigh all-powerful being from across the universe in order to destroy humanity and rebuild it according to his personal ideals. By the way, if that name, Roger Bacon, sounded familiar, he probably looks pretty different from the dried-out mummy in Koudelka. Well, that's because he isn't Roger. He's actually a wizard named Albert Simon, who, 700 years before the start of this story, was a gifted student of Bacon's. Despite his high intelligence, he was unable to progress far in society due to being seen as lower class, and he developed a hatred for how those in power ignored the plight of the poor. Wanting for all to be treated as equals, he brought his ideas towards the Vatican and was condemned as a heretic for what they saw as too radical an ideology. Eventually, he was released from imprisonment and set about on a plan to topple the corrupt society through the use of forbidden magic. In other words, his motivation is,
this world is imperfect.
What?
To pull this off, he stole sacred tomes from the Vatican, including the Immigrate document given to Patrick Hayworth in the first game, all in an attempt to bring forth a being with enough power to exact what he views as justice for a corrupt society. However, since he's, kind of a wanted criminal, the Vatican sent exorcist James O'Flaherty and Morris Elliott to hunt him down. James is super duper dead, kind of, and Morris, Alice's father, was killed before the start of the game. All of this to say he's become a man very dedicated to his cause and willing to stop at nothing to get what he wants. Now, Yuri and company must team up with the real Roger Bacon, who's still living at the monastery in a super retro-futuristic sci-fi lab with a treadmill-powered teleporter, and did I mention this game is silly? But I'm sure all that can wait. We need to get the good ending, and you can only do that at this point in the game. If you head up to the final dungeon beforehand, you're screwed. Fortunately, it's not too difficult despite being totally hidden. First, you need to raise Yuri's malice to red. This is a weird little meter the game says should never turn red, so of course, now you have to. Anyway, once you do that, run around until you get in a fight. The masks that have been haunting Yuri and his soul graveyard thing will show up one by one, and you have to beat all of them. Then, you need to head to the graveyard to clear Yuri's malice. While you're there, and you only get one chance, you need to look at the small tombstone next to the Dark Spirit grave marker. It'll say Alice's name on it. Then, you go back to Roger Bacon to continue the story, whereupon Alice wakes up in the graveyard. Each tombstone reads out the same sentiment, followed by a different thought Yuri's had about her since the start of the game. I just want to reiterate, I really enjoyed Yuri's character arc in this game. Traumatized, self-loathing, constantly blaming himself for everything that's gone wrong with his life. His dad disappeared without a trace, he couldn't protect his mom from possessed villagers, he was outcast from his home, and despite the cocky demeanor he tries to put on, he's really just a sad kid carrying a lot of baggage. Alice has her own hang-ups, being an exorcist from a very young age and losing her father right in front of her eyes, but her extremely caring nature means she cares for Yuri more and more as the game goes on. She was even willing to take on the curse of the four masks to make things easier for him, a deal that meant her death is very soon and seemingly unavoidable. And no, this totally isn't something I learned after the fact while browsing the wiki. Why would you think that? This all comes to a head when Alice is confronted by the masks in her dream. It is time for her to surrender herself to their leader, the embodiment of their curse. She steps into a void only to meet Atman, the true self. Now, if you don't take steps to get the good ending, Alice has to fight him on her own and the fight is unwinnable, meaning she dies after the final boss. But if you did, Yuri steps in, some How? Look, just don't ask. And joins her to defeat him. With the entity beaten, Alice is freed from the curse and lives on past the final battle. From what I understand, just like Koudelka, the bad ending is considered canon because I guess Sacnoth is just really full of emos. But still, with all that out of the way, the crew makes their way up to the float to confront Albert once and for all. And I must admit, I love the exchange Yuri has with him. Instead of making some long-winded speech about how Albert's wrong and he's super evil and they'll never let him win, he just says, hey look, I can get where you're coming from, but you're gonna kill billions of people, and I believe humanity can overcome its flaws. So let's fight all out and let destiny decide who's right. No hard feelings, no matter who wins. It's great, that's actually a pretty nonchalant way to confront the man summoning an all-powerful god to smite the world. I mean, if they fail, at least they tried, right? That's all that matters at the end of the day. So, you take him on in the boss fight that, okay, that design's awesome. Where was I? Yeah, alright, this fight's not that hard. Dude spoke so highly of himself, and he isn't even the toughest boss in the game. But come on. You didn't think that'd be the real final boss, did you? This is a JRPG. They brought up a godlike being. You know what happens next. We fly up to space to fight a super-powered alien on a magic circle in the sky. Woo! This game's so cheesy, I love it. The final boss really does encapsulate the experience of playing this game. Structurally, it isn't anything amazing. It's still cliche in places, but oh boy, did they swing for the fences with them. This is also the fight where I use the items multiplying my number of Judgement Ring rotations in tandem with an item that makes my whole wheel a hit area. Here's how that went. After a long, hard-fought battle, the being is defeated and our team is brought back to Earth. The float is destroyed, along with the magic circle, and it looks like the adventure has come to an end. All the characters get their own little epilogues regardless of if you got the good ending or not. Keith returns to his castle after he becomes bored with the outside world. Juzin continues roaming the land, helping people in need of an exorcist. Margaret invents the bikini 33 years before it actually existed, apparently, and Hallie travels with Koudelka to America to join his father. As for Yuri and Alice, they end the game as it began, together on a train. Except now, they have each other for support, and they're far stronger as people than when this journey began. Oh, and then the game decides to give you a little history lesson by saying, hey, remember, 1914 was the start of World War I, so tens of millions of people are about to die horribly regardless of your actions in this story. So I guess you could say, we tried so hard, and we got so far, and in the end, it didn't even matter. And that's Shadow Hearts, and wow, what a cool game. What a cool thing, really. This game is pure self-indulgence on the part of the creators, just throwing in whatever they thought was cool in the aim of making a good game, and I have nothing but respect for that. This is joining games like Dark Cloud, Dot Hack, and Artanelico in my lineup of most PS2 JRPGs. It just has that specific feel of new hardware they couldn't quite make full use of yet, recent knowledge from the last generation, and ambition of mid-sized creators given a chance to put out something really cool. I didn't know what I was expecting from the spiritual successor to Koudelka, but I certainly wasn't disappointed. In fact, I think I actually prefer Shadow Hearts, but that's not to say it's entirely better. These two games are very different. Different tones, different structure, different scale, different focus to plot, different combat, and yet they're technically part of the same series. Altogether, I think I respect Koudelka more as a fascinating experiment, but I'd rather replay and recommend Shadow Hearts because it was just so much darn fun. And that's really the point here. Shadow Hearts is the cheesy B-horror movie of JRPGs. It's silly, dumb, tropey, and clearly a cut below the biggest names around at the time from, like, just about every, quote, objective criteria you could think of. But there's so much love and joy poured into making the ridiculous roller coaster the creators wanted it to be. Maybe most of the characters aren't that compelling. Maybe the combat is a bit clunky and slow. And maybe it's really annoying to hide so many things from the player without hinting at them at all, even though they're kind of vital to the experience you should at least hint at them. So this is definitely a game for those used to this kind of old style genre weirdness. I'm genuinely curious what this game would have been like if Hiroki Kikuta didn't leave the company after Koudelka's development, but what we got is a super fun successor dripping with quirk and oddity, which really fits the Halloween spirit in my eyes. So, this spooky season, or the next, if I didn't get this out on time, consider giving Shadow Hearts a try. Maybe make it a month-long thing, play it for an hour each night, and cap it off on Halloween like a movie marathon. But it does make me wonder, with how wacky this game was, what on earth is the sequel like? But what the heck is this?